And welcome back, NCHC fans. It's another episode of MNCAA. It's our holiday podcast episode along with Max Veech. I'm Nick Maxson with you here. It's the week before the holidays here, Max. There's still plenty of college hockey chatter that we have to get to. We'll recap some of the light action that was in the conference. And speaking of that action, Max, shall we say that the heat was turned up in Grand Forks. So this will be something we'll discuss. And then a game of what if. I kind of feel like we're on the newlywed game. We'll play that here with our listeners here a little bit later. But Max, good to see you back, man. How's it going?
It's great to be back. Yeah, I mean, again, UMD off this past weekend here, so get to keep my eyes on some other stuff happening around college hockey, and I'm finding myself having a lot of fun watching some of these other teams. Normally, it's just kind of one of those you keep one eye on them when you need to, and that's about it. But keeping up with some of these programs that have Frozen Four aspirations or national title aspirations is a lot of fun this year. So.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to more of that in the second half, and hopefully, my attention is drawn back to UMD at least a little bit with some of the success that they can have if they right the ship a little bit.
Yeah, and again, we talked about how last week how UMD the growing pains are there. They're just not getting the W's as of yet, but there are some positive trends that are happening for the Bulldogs. I kind of want to stick with that because, as you mentioned, they were off this past week. In fact, only a few teams in the conference had action this past weekend. Up next for UMD will be Bemidji State. We talked about that already a little bit last week. They tend to be a perennial split machine. But again, they seem to be 2018 form Bemidji State, where they're a disruptor type team. And so that's a bit worrying. Why don't you go ahead and I'll give you a few seconds here to comment on the Beavers because, they give their opponents fits, for lack of a better phrase.
They certainly do. I mean, they're not an easy out any night, which is, always frustrating to be playing against as an opponent. But as somebody that watches, it's one of those things that you go into every night if you are a fan and you're like, well, we could win or we could lose. And for the last 2 or 3 years, it's probably been longer than that, but it's just a trend that I've kind of noticed here. I would say the vast majority of every weekend they play, regardless of who the opponent is, they're finding a way to split. And that's sometimes a good thing and sometimes a bad thing. So the fact that, UMD had already lost to them in overtime once, I'm hoping that's a good thing for UMD. But it's not your traditional, 2 games in 1 weekend type thing. It's 2 games split out over the course of a couple of months with quite a bit of growing on both sides in between. So we'll see if that trend continues as well. But I just don't know what to think of the Beavs right now. Not that I have much negative to say about them, but they're certainly not blowing my socks off outside of, Matthias Scholl's ability to steal a game here and there. The defense is pretty good and the offense is sufficient. I don't think that there's any major red flags that if I were a BSU fan, I would be throwing up, or I'm not upset with the season that they've had so far. It's just one of those things that feels like more of the same. You're waiting to kind of get over a hump. So interested to see where they turn things around if they do in the second half of the season as well.
St. Cloud will have a similar foe here also on the 29th with St. Thomas. Remember, that was the first game of the season after an exhibition against the Gophers way back in the early parts of October. So similar schedule quirks for both of our squads and kind of a trap game again for St. Cloud that could be potentially with what happens with the World Junior selection here coming up for the next week. They could be without their top goal scorer in Austin Bernovic. They also could be without one of their top 4 defensemen in Colin Ralph. Brett Larson will be there regardless, as he's an assistant coach along with David Carl for the Team USA squad, trying to repeat for the first time as gold medalists in the World Junior Championships heading up there in Ottawa. So we'll see, right? It's an interesting quirk in the schedule, and I'll just say this: I'm a little nervous, especially if they are without those two players, or even one. I think, especially the Bernovic. If Bernovic is out, that leaves me worried where the offense might come from. Max, let's do this. Since we just had a couple of NCHC squads that had action last weekend. Let's go ahead and kind of briefly run through those here a little bit. So Denver and Colorado College had that goal pan. The split, CC, the 5-4 win on Friday, DU getting the 2-1 win on Saturday. that seems about right. CC kind of winning the more of the track meet style. Denver making adjustments. They win the 2-1, much tighter game on Saturday. Again, two good teams that are just, battling it out, not too far away from each other. I don't really think we would expect anything less from that series as the season has gone on. But again, a good battle between two good NCHC squads there this past weekend.
Yeah, it's one of those ones where DU has kind of owned that series over the last decade or so, but CC is on the rise. We kind of referenced that as a preview to that series on last week's episode, and it played out exactly like that. 2 1-goal games. I think both squads played very well, having a good amount of people leaving DU and CC for World Juniors responsibilities following that one. Left a lot didn't leave a lot on the table from either side there. So it was good to see a tightly contested matchup. And I'm glad to see that that's back to being competitive again. I didn't, particularly care for the DU blowouts or just kind of checking the box and taking that freebie trophy home. It kind of felt like the Gophers football team when they were playing for the Axe for the better part of the last decade, the last 3 years withstanding, obviously, with the success that they've had there. But I'm glad that those are back to good contests, and both of those games, Friday and Saturday, were fun to keep up with as well, because they obviously finished in 1-goal games and they were fought that way the entire way too.
UN also Nebraska, Omaha, and Lindenwood. And how about this Lindenwood? A 3-2 victory on Friday over the Mavericks. They would respond, though, UNO would, with a 2-1 win Saturday. I mean, I can't make of what Nebraska Omaha is, right? They're the team that, from whatever it is this season, it seems like it's either they're on or they're off. When they're on, great team. Offense maybe is the biggest question mark in terms of consistency. We know they have good offensive talents up front. I watched that in person when they played St. Cloud. They've got some talent there, but it seems like it's shallow in terms of depth, and 2, it just doesn't always seem to click. And for whatever reason, Lindenwood, and no disrespect to the Lions, a team that maybe doesn't pop out you on paper, they had struggled with. Again, a split on the weekend series, Max, and that one might be a bit of a pairwise killer for UNO if they had really any sort of hopes of trying to rebound from what was a tough start. That one's going to be a bit of a backbreaker for them. Not to say that's impossible, because, well, asterisks look at Wisconsin, what they've been doing over the past month or so. But it definitely doesn't help them in their chase to get back into a top 16 position here within the pairwise.
Yeah, I think you nailed everything that I was going to touch on there as well. Just specifically related to the pairwise implications coming out of that one. UNO was kind of clinging on to some hopes that maybe they could make a second half push there, but that loss puts them in a position where it's an even steeper uphill battle. The hole that they've kind of been digging for themselves. They blasted through the bedrock with some dynamite there, and I don't know that there's any lifelines kind of available for them on that side. So it's turning into you're going to have to win the NCHC tournament to get a bid, unless you go on one unprecedented run to kind of finish the season for them in that second half there. So tough to see out of a UNO squad that had some higher expectations than usual coming into the season, given how they finished last year, but just haven't been able to put the pieces together, at least not consistently, down in Omaha.
Couldn't agree with that more, Max. Tough. Again, Mike Abenett, one heck of a hockey coach, just for whatever reason, just a very up and down season for them that unfortunately put them in a very tough position. And you said unprecedented run. It isn't impossible. We've seen crazier things in college hockey, but in this conference, I feel like, again, that steeper hill is even bigger in terms of the opponents that have to beat in order to accomplish that very unlikely feat. But you never know, right? You just never know. One thing we do know, though, Max, is that college hockey sometimes can get testy, can get emotional. And my goodness, was it apparently pretty emotional up in Grand Forks this past weekend between my Huskies and the Fighting Hawks. A tough weekend for St. Cloud. Only 1 point on the weekend. they got swept, essentially lost 2-0 on Friday, and then the Saturday loss as well in overtime. 4-3 was the final score. But I'll put it this way: we shared a video, and thank you to the Midco crew for catching this. Probably not really knowing what they were going to catch, but some choice words being thrown between Brad Berry and Brett Larson. Max, did you happen to see that, and any sort of reactions when you saw what looked to be some heated exchanges between the two benches?
Yeah, it reminded me of the Wild when they were playing. Was it Winnipeg when they were going John back and forth? Yeah, yeah.
It was bonus, and then it was well, I can't think of his name. Our last coach,
Creed.
Columbus. Yeah. Yes, Creed. And I think it was his reaction, just sort of cool, calm, and collected, just looking to the side and just sort of, okay, yeah, come on over, like let's go. But it wasn't that, right? It was very, the body language was, I'm not happy with what's going on. And I think what triggered this, Max, if I saw that, was it looks like Gavin Thorson was trying to cut or power his way toward the crease. It looked like he was actually bumped into the North Dakota goaltender by his own defender. Now, granted, could you make an argument that Thorson, was he on a trajectory that may have had a collision to begin with? I'm sure that's what the Fighting Hawks were probably not, happy with themselves. Although from my perspective, seriously, objectively, I didn't feel like even if there was much contact there. And Max, I'm curious as to what you saw. But certainly anytime that an opposing player, sort of trains their way through your crease, you're going to cause a little bit of a stir, no question.
Yeah, I think there was maybe a little bit of theatrics, whether intended or unintended, with the goalie helmet coming off there, and just the I don't want to say flopping, because he was pushed over, so it's like the exacerbated flailing. I don't even know. But to what you were saying earlier, I think that there was a little bit of contact, but not nearly enough to drive that type of a response, and so. I don't think it was anywhere near as intentional as, let's say Neil Pionk driving into the North Dakota goalie. As much as I love throwing that clip out there, I know it drives UND fans mad, because that one was quite clearly on purpose when you put your shoulder right into the chest of the goalie. This one was not that. This was somebody that probably was on a trajectory to miss the goalie, knowing that being athletic, you can probably skirt around that last minute most cases. But when another player goes into your exit lane there, you're kind of forced into where your momentum's carrying you. And that's kind of what happened there. So do I think that it was an intent to injure or anything like that? No. Do I think that he probably should have been, punished for that, because you have to stay out of those lanes? Also, probably, unfortunately. And that's just part of hockey, playing at fast speeds, and it's something that happens. So I like seeing the coaches and some of the teams getting fired up over things like that. It shows that both teams have a passion for playing, and that's good for everybody that's watching. It's good for the league. It's good for hockey in general. So do I want to see that every night? No. Is it okay once in a while? Yeah, I think it's totally fine.
Yeah, and those two teams won't meet again. I'm trying to get the schedule pulled up when they're back in St. Cloud. That won't be until the end of January. In fact, Friday the 31st, and then welcome in February. So not that far away, about a month away. So 5 weeks roughly. I would imagine that both of the squads have taken some numbers in that, so that it could be quite the fireworks show happening up at the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center come when these two teams meet again. So I'm kind of looking forward to that. But I found that interesting, because I know that Brett, like any hockey coach in the moment, right? When, your bench is being chirped at, when they're coming at you, when you can clearly see, as I mentioned, I agree with you. I think there was some theatrics. There definitely was contact. I think there was some exaggeration. I definitely would have called it a dive if I was an NHL ref, but at the end of the day, I get it. And at the heat of the moment, things happen. So it's two teams going to battle. We know how important these NCHC teams, treasure the wins, losses, especially in the conference, and being that St. Cloud. Now, if you look at the standings, in fact, let's run through that real quick before we get some out of NCHC standings and some happenings too. Is St. Cloud now in 4th place in North Dakota because of that 5-point weekend? We talked about it, Max. There's so much traffic in the middle of the standings. North Dakota goes up two spots. They're in 2nd place now in the NCHC. So why don't you go through the standings for our viewers here and what has changed, because there was a ton of movement after this past weekend.
Yeah, just like you mentioned, and what we've talked about all year, and probably for a couple years in a row here, is just the shuffling of teams in the middle of the pack in the NCHC. It's always only a couple of points, especially this early on in the season, as far as league play goes. But North Dakota jumping up 2 with a sweep on the weekend, that kind of forces down your ASU, just because they didn't have the same type of results to kind of cling to there. And then St. Cloud with those losses obviously drops down a spot as well. Colorado College and Denver both moving up a slot, with each kind of sharing a point in that series there. And that's Omaha losing to Lindenwood and not being, able to gain any more traction in the conference because they're not playing a conference opponent, drops those same 2 spots as well, out of the Colorado colleges, both colleges in Colorado, whatever. To allow them to surpass them. And then you've got UMD, Miami, and Western all staying stagnant at, the bottom and top respectively as well, due to lack of results on the board as well. So a lot of movement there. And I think, the ones that are probably most surprising are at the top there, with St. Cloud still behind Arizona State. And I don't think they would be if they would have split that series.
Nope.
Where do we have points there? They're only one point away, so they get the extra one. They're tied there, and I would think they're going to surpass them as well. So I think that's probably how it will shake out moving on as well. But Arizona State has surprises before, so we'll see.
We've seen it. And again, 2nd through 7th place, it's 6 points. So again, we talked about this last week. It's one good weekend of hockey that could, just literally launch you up the standings. From 7th right now is in Omaha, 6 points. If everything stayed stagnant, they'd be in 2nd place. So, as tough as a Omaha unprecedented run, as we talked about earlier, not impossible. So it's going to make for a fun second half of NCHC hockey as we get to past the holiday break, which leads us to outside the conference here, Max, because there was a lot of storylines we talked about, being able to catch some action outside of the conference and some teams that we normally don't get to see. So why don't you talk about some of the maybe some of the matches that you did get to see, and some results that maybe caught your eye?
Yeah, first, it's the kind of recurring segment on here. Max was right. Dartmouth sucks. Maybe they don't suck. That's a bit of an exaggeration. The ECAC schools are overrated based on having no, set schedule or no meat within their schedule to kind of rely on. So their slide continues. They didn't lose on the weekend. They just had a 3-3 tie with UNH, but UNH is also not the same type of team that they were last season as well. I think the goaltender turnover there was huge for that program. And so, getting another tie against a floundering team, or a struggling team, and floundering is a bit too harsh. Not great for the Dartmouth pairwise. And it just kind of goes to show you that maybe they were, people were a little bit too eager to want them rated within that top 10 there. So they're probably more aptly rated now, and I would expect them to kind of turn things around a little bit there and get some of those standard wins when ECAC play starts to pick up again. You're always going to have your Browns, your Yales, your other teams that you would expect to collect some of those wins against. So I don't think that they're going to have a struggle on their hands for a long period of time, but I also thought that they were way overrated previously, and that's one that I wanted to see. Not that I want to see them lose. I just wanted to be right so badly, and it turns out that that's probably the case, and that is what it is. But the series that I think is the most impactful, obviously to the national standings, but to some of our friends here as well. And it was talked about on the Gophers part of the MNCAA segment here. But the Minnesota and Michigan State series was incredible to watch. That was one that I watched every minute of. And if you missed out on that one, find a way to go back and take a look, because those two teams are both of the caliber that I would expect to see in the Frozen Four. And I think that this series kind of proved it, despite the fact that Minnesota comes away with, no wins on the weekend. I think, playing with a reduced roster, I think they only had 9 forwards at one time on the bench because of the injuries and other things that they're dealing with there. They still found a way to compete with that Michigan State squad, and every minute of play was kind of high intensity and what you would expect in a playoff atmosphere as well. So I want to hear what your thoughts were, because I know that there was some group chat messages kind of being thrown around, and if you kind of felt the same way, or if you saw some of the cracks that I might have missed there.
So I was flipping back between St. Cloud and Nodak plus this
Sure.
game. And my goodness, first of all, Trey Augustine, he's the real deal. If there's anything, not that I think if folks who follow college hockey, I think already knew that. But again, you talk about the Big Ten, you talk about different levels of opponents. Trey Augustine this past weekend and multiple times of the game kept Michigan State from surrendering a lead, or kept the Gophers who was pushing hard in both nights to really keep them at bay. He was really the best player for Michigan State in that roster. Other thing, Charlie Stramel, the ovation, or should I say that the lack thereof, that he received at Mariuccia, I thought that was kind of interesting, but he looks better. I'll put it to you that way. Now, is he still, and I'm not a pro hockey scout, let's go that far, right? But is he still first round caliber? I don't know, but I am glad to see that he isn't stuck in essentially a fourth line or maybe a healthy scratch role like he was under Mike Hastings in Wisconsin. So I do feel like his game is coming together a bit. I still want to see more, but two high flying offenses, some really good D, and of course, great goaltending. For me, this is easily a preview of the Big Ten championship game that we expect to see either in Michigan or here at Mariucci. Those are my 2 cents here, Max. But yeah, great college hockey there. Played down in Minneapolis. So very, very happy to see that. I'm curious as to about Minnesota State a little bit. Let's keep it local. And then we'll go off into over the border per se. Minnesota State are they sort of under the radar a bit? And I think partly is because it's in the CCHA, and this is no disrespect to that league, but they're sitting 12th, I think, in the pairwise right now. So they're sitting pretty. They're a team that I think I overlooked heading into this year as being a team that would be as consistent as they are. I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on the Mavericks, the other one that's in the CCHA conference that we cover here in the great state of hockey.
Yeah, I kind of rely on the crutch of comparing teams to other teams, whether it's even in the same sport or not. I'm sure people that have listened have kind of picked up on that a little bit, but if I was to compare them to another one in college hockey, it would be North Dakota. Both of those teams seem like they're playing below what their ceiling probably is for the season, but they still find a way to win every weekend, at least of late anyway, for the most part. And it's one of those weekends, this past one, where you kind of expected them to come away with a relatively easy sweep against a Lake Superior State program who's struggled over the last couple of years to produce some high end talent and compete week in and week out. And that's not at all what happened this weekend. It was 2 really close games there. One of them going into overtime against the Lake State squad there. And I don't know what the message or the vibes are in that Minnesota State locker room, because they have been winning. They are nationally ranked. They've beaten some good teams earlier this year in your North Dakotas, your Michigans, and whatever else. So they've got a good resume to go with it, but it's just never seeming very comfortable for them as well. They've got a great goaltender. I can't fail to not mention that. And Alex Tracy, he's done some incredible things this year as well. So I'm confused with them a little bit in terms of how I would feel if I was a fan, just because they are winning. It's just never the easy path. It must be something with that purple and gold color scheme, because it's very fitting that the Vikings tend to not have very many convincing wins. Not this past weekend, but it seems to be something going on in the state with those colors.
And it's interesting too with Minnesota State too, is I'm curious too, because there's edgy type wins are coming against teams that on the national stage, not great, right? So I think there is a question mark for me as to now, could they win the CCHA? Yes, 100%. I think when you break it down, it's between them and Bemidji State, probably the top 2, although it's really wide open. You also can maybe throw Augustana in there as well. But you get them outside of that conference, I'm not so sure how they hold up. Now, it's no disrespect again to the Mavericks. Again, great goaltending. That's defense has always been sort of their identity, even going back to the Hastings era. But I am curious as to, because of just how close these games have been with these shall we say, not the best opponents from the national perspective. I do wonder what it would be like for them outside of the conference, but that's yet to be said. I want to switch gears to Wisconsin. Yes, that team. Because there's some things that pop out to me about Wisconsin. First of all, they started 3-8, right? Going back from the beginning of the season. And then since then, they're 6-2-1. And Max, if you were to guess how many of their games have gone to overtime this season, how many would you guess?
Knowing that there was a lot to start the year and their expected goals versus actualized goals was the biggest discrepancy in all of college hockey, at least at the week 6 mark. Overtimes, I would guess 7 of their games went to overtime.
Close, but still short. They've gone to 9 overtime sessions so far this season. Wow. So, now they're trending in the right direction. We'll put it to you that way. They're now 26th in the pairwise. But here's the catch with Wisconsin. First of all, the last 2 weekends, they split with Michigan State. And mind you, the one that they lost was in overtime. They also split with Michigan. That loss also this past weekend was in overtime. So, Max, this team, which we thought was dead on arrival, essentially at the middle of November, in fact, right before Thanksgiving, I think we both pegged them as they're done skis.
Yeah.
And we said, well, they could go on a run, but I don't think it's going to matter. We've so far been wrong, although there's still work for them to do. This team has even climbed up to some national attention, per se, as we'll give it to a former colleague of mine, Pat Micheletti, who's put them as number 5 in terms of the power rankings of the Big Ten. I don't know if that's a stretch from my perspective, but I also understand where he's coming from because, again, 6-2-1, most of those losses coming in the extra session. They've turned a corner. We'll put it to you that way. What have you seen, or what do you think has finally, come together for the Badgers? Because now they've gone from a team that couldn't win a hockey game to now they're in every single one, and the ones they're losing are in the extra session, and they could have easily turned those into wins too.
Yeah, when you're talking about those wins and losses sting, but when you're getting that extra point to go along with a win on the weekend and you're taking the majority of those points, that's how you're going to claw back up into those Big Ten standings for sure, but the national rankings as well. And it's fun to watch. It's a bit frustrating to watch as somebody who's naturally been trained to root against Wisconsin and everything that has to do with the program out there, but it's impressive. I think you kind of have to tip your cap to what they're doing out there, and to get splits and 4 or 6 points against those 2 squads that you're mentioning there from Michigan is incredible. And just talking about Michigan again here, the Friday game, Wisconsin shuts them out. It was 4-0. That's the third game in a row that Wisconsin hadn't scored a point. So you knew that they were, firing whatever they could to try and get off the schneid there a little bit, and they just couldn't figure it out. And so all credit to Wisconsin, and I'm assuming Scarfoni was the one in net there and getting that shutout for the Badgers. But yeah, I would say their defense seems to have tightened up quite a bit in terms of the opportunities that they're giving up. They're kind of forcing a couple more things out to the outer edges there and not giving up those big dumb plays right in the dead center of the slot there, or even at the lower circles. They're not letting people get around them. They're literally sticking with them and forcing them down below the baseline there. And it's something that I know that Hastings is happy about. He's kind of been focused on a defensive scheme for the majority of his career, and that's not necessarily been Wisconsin or a Big Ten identity. And I don't think that they'll be, I don't think that they'll be, transitioning to that completely. But the fact that it is a little bit cleaner now is something that I'm sure he's sleeping a little bit easier at night, knowing that progress is being made.
It's interesting, right? Because when you look at their season as a coagulate, right, you kind of look back at some of the results in the overtimes. You kind of look at that win-loss schedule and go, man, it could have been a lot different. And it's possible. I'll be the first to admit, maybe I wrote them off a bit too soon. Who knows? There's still essentially half of the season still left to play. So we'll see. But they have had a remarkable stretch here the past 8 games, as we mentioned before, 8-10. So, Max, we're going to play a little game because it is the holidays. It's Would You Rather. I feel like I'm back sitting at a college apartment here, and we'll leave it at that. And thankfully, there's no alcohol involved here on this podcast as we're playing this. But Max, why don't you go and set the table here and see how we're going to go about doing this? Because I'm very excited to see what you have up your sleeve here. Max's microphone is not coming through here. Did he hit the mute button? Yes.
I did. Yeah, I was sitting here on mute. I'm cutting my tape on my fingers here because it was coming apart. But I set blind teams. I just have them listed. Team 1, Team 2 for our first set that we're going to go through as far as would you rather to pick these teams here, and then Team A and Team B for our second set. So we'll start with the first one here. I'm going to give you their record, how many ranked wins they've got, save percentage, some general stats. And then I want you to tell me which squad you would rather have. So,
okay.
Team 1, they've got a record of 10, 7, and 1. So double-digit wins. 2 of those being ranked wins at the time. I'm not saying they're ranked now, but ranked wins at the time. And that's going to be true for all of our instances here. A goalie tandem, I should say, but goalies in general, with a 932 save percentage. So very impressive there. And then a penalty kill that's equal to their opponent. Team 2, 8, 6, and 1. So 2 less wins, 1 less loss.
Okay.
Only 1 ranked win and a 912 save percentage. So Team 1 or Team 2, which would you rather have right now?
So being that, I mean, the numbers are similar, especially when you look at the win-losses. The 2 ranked wins and the combined save percentage do stick out to me. So I would have to go to Team 1.
Okay. Naturally, I think most people would, because you've got more ranked wins, a higher win percentage and a stronger goalie, at least in the metrics anyway. Team 1, Augustana. They're 30th in the pairwise right now. So it's one of those situations where it's maybe they're outplaying their ranking there. They've just had a couple of bad losses that's pushing them down. I'm not sure what the deal is there. Team 2 is Quinnipiac, and they're up at 17. They're knocking on the door of getting into the tournament on an at-large bid there. Obviously, you're going to have to climb probably 3 or 4 spots higher than that, but they're not out of arm's reach of a weekend putting them in there. And they're significantly lower down on the wins, losses, and some of the other statistical things that people tend to look at. So I would say that I would probably fall into that same camp as you on that blind ranking, or my blind decision there. And it's kind of crazy to look at it when you kind of go into it. And that's not me picking on Quinnipiac. That's just the only one that had comparable numbers that was higher ranked when I was putting this together. So,
and it's interesting.
Your thoughts?
You know what's interesting about that, Max? It shows, going back to last year, and I hate to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. There was folks crying foul about Arizona State having over 20 wins and not making the tournament. What you just highlighted is the strength of schedule matters. Essentially is what it is, right? When you have these similar metrics and you have, ranked wins, and then you've got, combined goalie save percentages. Again, I called an Augustana game back in the late stages of October. Mm-hmm. And their goaltending was what carried them through. Josh Kotai, I believe he's the freshman goaltender there. They're good. That goaltending tandem is good. It's a 1-2 punch there for the former Husky, both player and coach, Garrett Raboyne. And I just feel like for Augustana, the one thing that is the question mark is just the offense. But at the end of the day, they've gotten enough. Again, you saw what the win total, they're there. But again, you talk about strength of schedule and 7 losses on the year compared to 10 wins, but of those 7, they have had a couple of tough losses on their schedule, which does drag you down, unfortunately, in the pairwise. And as I know you continue to harp on every single year, it's not that the good wins against ranked teams, put you higher. It's more of like these bad losses. They just drag you down that much more. And we're seeing that here with this set here, as you put out here in this first scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. We got a similar situation. I promise one of these teams is currently ranked in the tournament there, so keep that in mind. Team A on this one, 9, 6, and 1. They've got 2 ranked wins of those 9 there. Sub 900 save percentage, 893, and a paltry penalty kill at 73%. Pretty poor when you're looking at the national averages there. Team B, 11-5-2. So only 5 losses on the season. They've only got one ranked win, a 911 save percentage, and an 88.7% penalty kill. So a pretty good penalty kill when you're talking about the national average. As soon as you get close to that 90 range, both for save percentage and penalty kill, obviously you want to be above that for save percentage, but really tough to be above that in penalty kill. That's usually my mark for those two anyway. Between those two teams, so I'll go over them again because I'm on my sidetracking spree here. 9-6-1, 2 ranked wins, mediocre goalie, really bad PK. 11-5-2, 1 ranked win, above average goalie, really good PK.
So Team A sounds like an East Coast team, because if you're still a 9-6-1, have that save percentage and that PK, that means you're winning track meets, is what it sounds like to me. In Team B, I think if you're just based on the metrics here, I think the obvious choice is Team B, right? Yeah, it's only 1 ranked win, but 73% of the PK. We talk about how the games, as they get into not only the, shall we say, the conference tournament time, but even towards the end of the regular season, and then certainly get to the NCAA tournament, those special teams become so important. I mean, look at what Denver had to do during the regionals last year, winning 2, I believe, 2 overtime games. And a big reason that they got there was not only was their goaltending, but their PK was excellent. So I don't love Team A, even though the 2 ranked wins are there. I'm sure this is a team that probably highly scores quite a bit. Not to say they're bad defensively. They probably rely on it. They probably have a ton of skill up front, which means I'm thinking I know who this is. But Team B, I just like the defensive metrics. I love the PK because that can really help you down the line, especially when these games, not that they don't matter now, but when they become more important, can be a big difference maker as you head into those late season matchups. So I'm curious as to if I'm close with my instincts on who these teams are.
Yeah. So Team A, you nailed it in terms of the East Coast team, in a lot of boat races, if you will. That's Boston University. They're 9-6-1 on the season there, and they refuse to play defense on the penalty kill, or at least that's what it seems like anyway. So a lot of really offensive minded forwards coming out of that program, and throughout the history, some great defensive players as well. I don't want to take that away from them, but more of the same this year on that front, and they've paid the price for it when they come up to another team that's able to score and be a little bit more stout on the defense. But that surprise team on that second slot there, and BU, for the record, ranked 10th in the pairwise, so they're an easy kind of shoe in right now for that national tournament spot. Second team, 11-5-2. That's Clarkson, which was kind of surprising to me when I was putting some of these numbers together there. They're having a heck of a season, and yes, it has something to do with who they're playing, that strength of schedule we were just mentioning before, leading to that overall record there. But to have an almost 89% penalty kill against anybody is great, especially anybody at this level. And they've done it against some really good quality teams in there too. So based on what I've seen, at least on paper here, I haven't got to watch Clarkson play in person or on TV, we'll say, at all this year. But that's forcing my hand a little bit into maybe trying to reach out and dig deep into the annals of ESPN Plus and find one of their games on there, because if that's what the numbers that they're putting up kind of look like on a weekly basis, it might be a team worth checking out, because that's impressive in my book.
So I've got Clarkson pulled up here. Let's kind of do a deep dive real quickly before we end this one. So in the conference, they're 5-1. They're 3rd in the ECAC. They're just behind Quinnipiac and Colgate for both teams. So 11-5-2 overall. They've got 10 regulation wins. They're 53 goals for, 38 goals against. So that's a great in terms of goal differential, you could say. But here's where it probably hurts them a bit, is some of those losses again. So they lost to RIT back in the first weekend of the season. That hurts. They also lost 3-1 against Alaska in a non-conference. We talked about how the non-conference can almost weigh worse than your conference schedule asked the Huskies that last year, something
Yeah.
that they really emphasized as we went into this season. They also lost to Brown. They also lost to Providence, who they've been a good team. So when you look at their record, it's not terrible. But when you look at those 3 losses, RIT, for sure, Alaska, and then Brown, those ones sting, and possibly why they're sitting where they are in the pairwise. Everything else looks really good.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show you that even those 3 losses, because of just how far those other teams are down, again, it's a lead anchor and a paper sail, like try to get you above that. It's tough.
Yeah.
So that's tough going for Clarkson. So they're in a position where even despite the metrics, despite the analytics, thanks to our guru here, Max Veech, you're playing a game of catch up, and you almost have to look at, do we have to win the ECAC at this point? Almost. I mean, 25th is not, it's not impossible to make that up, but still, it's not like you're within an arm's reach, right, Max? You're going to have to string together some wins, and more importantly, you have to avoid some tough losses. And that's really the key as they go forward for the second half of the year.
Yeah, they're going to need some quality wins against those upper echelon teams within their own conference there, whether it's your Quinnipiac or Cornell, or at this point Colgate seems like they would be a quality win in there as well, and not losing to those same teams I had mentioned previously when we were talking about that conference in your Browns, your Yales, your Princeton even. But the one that sticks out to me the most is that RIT loss, because if this was 365 days ago, RIT is a great program. They're the best in Atlantic hockey, and the loss to them wouldn't really matter to anybody, or not nearly as much as it does this year. But they have not been able to maintain the same type of success without Scarfoni or some of the people that aged out or graduated or transferred or whatever happened up in there. And so that loss at RIT is the one that kind of sticks out to me as the one that's weighing them down more than any other right now.
No question. So let's do this before we sign off here, Max. A quick preview for your Bulldogs against Bemidji State, because it's not just one game. They've got a couple of games pretty close together, and that's a bit tough, especially right after the holiday break.
Yeah, so I think we're taking a week off next week. Obviously, we record usually Tuesday, Wednesday. That's Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, a week from now. So not going to be able to preview much of anything. Not that there's a ton of other games going on after that anyway. But UMD playing on New Year's Eve night up in Bemidji there. I don't know if Sandelin did that on purpose to keep the guys out of trouble, or if that's just kind of the way things shook out. But a rare Tuesday game for an NCHC team should be interesting to kind of keep up with. It'll give me something to do on New Year's Eve. I know I'm well past the age of going out and getting into anything debaucherous, and trying to find any excuse I can to kind of either host a house party or something else anyway. So loving that. It's a good quality game that if I'm looking to see the teams match up again and see kind of how things have changed over the last couple of months here. But the tough part of it is UMD is then going to have to play 3 days later. Not that they have to travel, because Alaska's coming to town and they're playing them at home there, and Bemidji is only a 3-hour drive from Duluth, assuming the roads are good. But any program that has to have that tight of a turnaround is going to be really tough, and having to do potentially both of those depending on results of World Juniors and everything else without Max Plant and Kleber is something that I don't know that UMD is really suited for at this time. I think Kleber has been by far and away the best defenseman on UMD's roster this year. There's quite a bit of help that the upperclassmen haven't been able to provide. I'm trying to be as diplomatic as I can here in how I phrase this. They're underwhelming compared to what people were expecting coming in, just given the leadership opportunity they have with such a large freshman class and the probable available ice time and everything else. And nobody seems to have grabbed that right now anyway. So having him gone is tough. He's a big body that is, in the right spot more often than not. And then Max Plant as well. Obviously he was gone for, a good chunk of the season there. already. And so having him leave again is tough. On the contrary to that, UMD has also learned how to play without him a little bit as well. But he's been the most dynamic offensive playmaker for him. Dominic James is obviously great in his own right, and I think will shine with a little bit more time with the puck on his stick. Granted, they're playing on different lines anyway, but not having Max Plant to elevate his brother and that second line there is a tough loss, just because he's been incredible to watch since his return. I think we'd mentioned it previously, 5 points in his first 6 games there. So we'll see how it shakes out. I think, we'll get to preview that Alaska series. So I don't want to talk about it too much, but we'll be doing that as I'm kind of multitasking here, I'm guessing anyway, in trying to watch the UMD series that's going on against Bemidji in the upcoming 2 weeks from now.
And then lastly, for my Huskies, so after the North Dakota results, St. Cloud does drop to 11th in the pairwise. And a Sunday, the 29th matchup, again, the second game against St. Thomas. I'm nervous. I'm very nervous. They're 49th in the pairwise. So you talk about that one loss that could be detrimental to the pairwise math. This is it. Definitely nowhere close to where we thought St. Thomas would be. I think all of us in college hockey were really thinking that St. Thomas, after they essentially took over the CCHA and barring getting injured to Blanken back, really probably would have won the CCHA in terms of the regular season, and then definitely had a chance to make the tournament folks a little bit sheepish had they won the CCHA tournament. And again, not eligible still to compete in the NCAA tournament for is it this year and then still next year, I believe. Yes. So
I believe so.
Season and then it's a 5-year for that transition from D3 to D1. Why 5 years? I don't get it. I don't agree with it. To me, 2, 3, sure, but 5, no, I don't get that. That makes no sense to me. But I digress. So, and especially if Bernovic isn't there and Colin Rolfe, if one or both are not there, that does worry me a bit. Not that St. Cloud couldn't figure itself out, but again, Bernovic leads this team in goals. I believe he's up to 8 or 9 on the season. So that is where the offense is going to come from. If there's anything that struggled with St. Cloud this year, has been the offense. Just to kind of touch on this real quick here, Max, when you talk about conference in terms of statistics that matter for St. Cloud this year, it's been the lack thereof the offense, right? So goals against, again, Isaac Posh before his injury. This team is good defensively. In fact, they've only given up 18 goals in the conference. That is the third least, 1 behind CC and 4 behind Western Michigan, who is a plus 10 overall. St. Cloud's only scored 20 goals in the conference. I believe that is third lowest. Sorry, no, second lowest. Nope, third. 12 is the lowest with Miami, 19 for CC, and then St. Cloud with 20. So both CC and St. Cloud just a plus 2 in the goal differential. So yeah, will be some nervous Nellies watching that game on Sunday the 29th. Because that one's going to probably be, we'll put it this way, it will determine whether or not St. Cloud finds itself in a different mode in the second half of the season. Would you agree with that assessment?
Absolutely, I would. We're talking about a team that suffered 2 bad losses to UMD at the very end of last year. Granted, it happened at a different time, and it changed the outcome of where they were in those playoff standings there, almost assuredly. And this one is one, I don't know that it would put them out of the playoff standings, but it would certainly drop them 2 or 3 spots in the national rankings. On top of the pairwise rankings with just a 1-game loss or a 1-game series there. So it's one that they're going to have to come correct on and play all out, and having to do that again without your star goaltender or without some of those other key pieces that might still be off the roster is a disadvantage that you don't want to be forced into. But it's one of those situations that make college hockey a little bit different than some of the other sports out there, where you're just missing stars in the middle of the season. And that's just, if you look at it from one opportunity or one direction, it's an opportunity for other kids to kind of step up and show that they're just as qualified to be playing out there on a week in and week out basis.
100%, Max. And with that, that's going to do it for our last show of 2024, albeit. Actually, no, we will be recording.
It won't be out in 2024.
Right. It won't be out in 2024. So with that being said, from all of us here at MNCAA, from Max and myself, happy holidays to everybody. Thank you for watching us this entire season and for the whole entire calendar year, going back to last collegiate calendar year for college hockey. We appreciate it. Hope everybody has a great time with some family and just enjoys the rest of 2024. Max, especially to you, it's always fun to come around once a week and do this with you, man. It's super fun. Happy holidays to you and your family, and wish you guys nothing but the best here going into 2025.
Same to you.
All right, guys, that will do it again. Last episode here at MNCAA for the NCHC. This is Nick Maxson with Max Veech signing off for the last time here in 2024.